Hi, everyone. With me today, I have Solomon Kahn. He is the CEO and owner of Delivery Layer, longtime data leader, LinkedIn data influencer, if I may say so. Super happy to have him on the podcast. And yeah, welcome.
Carl, thank you so much for having me. Exciting to be here.
Right. So we've been chatting back and forth on LinkedIn and had a couple of chats on the side. And I was listening also to your podcast. And one of the things that impressed me the most was your view on, your take on A/B testing. I think that had a lot of, insight into it, especially given the fact that you differentiate between the science and the scientism of overdoing A/B testing. Um, for my viewers, can you sum up a little bit about why do you think businesses are not doing A/B testing correctly?
Sure. Let's jump right into the most controversial stuff, right?
Exactly.
So my experience, I've worked as a data leader for a long time, mostly at companies where I led data teams. And what I saw with A/B testing is that we had a lot of, I would say, false confidence about the results that we were getting, and there were so many problems with the way that I've seen A/B tests implemented. And when I went to really think through all of the different issues that I had seen in A/B testing over the years, I came to the conclusion that in general, I think we took a lot of hard science experimentation methodology and brought it over to business, but a lot of the assumptions don't hold the same truth in hard science versus in business. For example, if you do an experiment 100 years ago or now or 100 years from now in the hard sciences, the expectation is that generally that experiment is going to have the same end result.
Right.
Business changes all the time. The market changes, the world changes, your customers change, your competitive market changes. And the things that you test might not even be true next week. And so the core foundational element of if we test something, is it going to be true? I just found that it didn't end up being so true. And then what I also found was that it significantly slowed down experimentation. So I want to very clearly differentiate between experimentation and A/B testing, because I think experimentation is crucial. And because only by experimenting are you able to effectively uncover things that work. And so what I saw was that experimentation was actually substantially slower, because you would have these A/B tests that you would run, and they would come up with inconclusive results, or you wouldn't really understand what was going on, and you had to wait for them to finish.
Right.
And it was causing all of this churn and effort, and I just didn't. It wasn't clear to me that the value that they brought offset the challenges that they posed.
Right. And it also probably, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was, why go with a 95% confidence? There's virtually no decision in business that we're taking on such a high level of confidence, right?
Exactly.
If you hit 95% confidence, I mean, what's the value in being so, detailed about it? And I'm sure a lot of folks will say, "Well, we need this and that, and that's the sound scientific method," but that's not how business works. Unless you're, I don't know, one of the biggest global companies optimizing something super small, where even a minor change with a gazillion users produce some result that, in absolute terms, is like, I don't know, a couple of million, but in reality, given 100 billion turnover, it's still, not that significant. There's certainly some wisdom into not overdoing it, right? That's the point that you're making.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond just the scientific challenges, like you said, the 95% confidence interval, or the the fact that businesses change over time very quickly often. just the way that these systems are implemented gives you a false sense of overconfidence about the actual validity of it. So, for example, this 95% confidence metric that we just talked about, and I didn't actually learn this specific fact until after I published my thoughts on A/B testing. But it seems like, based on the prior evidence, that everybody who's out there thinking that they have 95% confidence in their A/B tests actually has closer to 70%, because 95%, because from a statistics perspective, in order to get to 95% confidence, you need to not have prior knowledge about false positives and false negatives of the experiments, et cetera. Due to the academic work that's been done on A/B testing, where you've had far more false positives than would be expected, we can adjust that. So actually, everybody that's out there thinking that they have 95%, it's probably closer to 75%. And this was shocking to me. And I made other points about how many of the people that are doing A/B testing, myself included in this case, don't fully understand all of the statistical weirdnesses that go around with it, and I have false overconfidence. All these people who think they're 95% confident, based on the latest academic literature, are actually only around 75% confident. And I see this at, the people who uncover that think, wow, look, we're getting better at becoming more understanding of A/B tests. Whereas for me, it's just another piece of evidence that this whole endeavor is falsely over scientific and makes people feel confident in ways that they shouldn't feel confident. And that, yes, experimentation is really important, but that by getting within A/B test, like the way that we implement A/B testing, it actually slows down experiments, and and you can't just ship things that you think are smart. So
Right. It's kind of the stuff where this inverse U-shape thing applies, where if you do very little of it, you're not doing a great job. If you overdo it, you're also not doing a great job, right? And that applies to so many things. What other analogies do you think apply in software development and data?
What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, I was just listening to you, I was thinking, well, if you take this whole, I always want to talk, I always like to talk about this. It's a great thing to hit against this agile software development thing, right? If you don't do anything at all, obviously you're not doing a great job. You need to understand, to be able to plan, to do all sorts of stuff. But if you overdo it, right, then it becomes its own thing. And as our mutual friends Joe said, no one ever did their best thinking in 2-week increments, right? So There's also a way where what seems like common wisdom, established practice in the field, is great for like as a baseline. But if you look at big tech, none of the greatest software products you use are done in 2 weeks, are created with a methodology of 2-week sprints, right?
Yeah, it's funny because this was.
If we're on controversial, let's go.
If we're on controversial, let's go. This is so I was a data leader and data person for almost 20 years before I started posting on LinkedIn about a year and a half ago, when I started Delivery Layer, and this was my first ever post that like blew up in a controversial way, where everybody said I was an idiot, because not everybody, it was half and half, because I said that agile doesn't work for data. And in particular, what I meant was that most large companies have a very specific implementation of agile that they use for the software development teams. And inevitably what happens is that you're a data leader and you're in one of these companies, and the CTO or the CIO comes in and says, we are rolling out, a scaled agile framework for our entire technology team. And you've got the ceremonies and the product owners and the sprints and the retros and the blah, 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 blah. You got the whole thing. And let's have the data team do that. That's because we want the entire technical organization to do the same thing. And what I said was, you shouldn't do that, because data work is different than software engineering work. I also think there are good arguments against that style of programming strictly for software engineering. But setting aside that, even if even if you concede the case that that's the best way to do software engineering at a big company, still you shouldn't do data. Um, you do need to solve the problems that Agile is trying to solve for, which is you need to make sure that you're actually driving business value. You need to make sure that you're communicating to stakeholders about what's going on. You need to make sure you don't have some massive project that's due 6 months from now that like you just like go into a hole for 6 months and then come out and then lo and behold the project is not done, right? You need to do all of those things, but the specific process of agile I have found is not so effective for data teams.
Yeah, this is a point where disclaimer to all my clients: your agile is great. We're talking generics here. You're absolutely right. You're on the money because, on the one hand, and I think the reason why it's so difficult to apply to data is because you have both the need, kind of both have a central function that you're doing, but you also absolutely need to put it in a vertical, I don't know, value streams, or we used to be tribes and all that kind of stuff, where you have a data person integrated in the team working independently, delivering value without being slowed down by some sort of central committee or leadership going on. And you kind of need to do both things correctly, right? To kind of figure out the platform centrally, but not too centrally for it to be a blocker. It really is an art more than a science. And the reason why everyone is arguing what's the best formula is there isn't any, right? It depends on the company, depends on the business, depends on the platforms, the technology you're using. And so you can both be right and then argue about what's the best method. And
100%. And this doesn't mean that it doesn't come with problems. Like one of my favorite quotes is that you never get rid of your problems, you only change them for new ones. And
Right.
so this doesn't mean that the benefits that you don't have problems doing it the other way. It's just that I find that the specific agile way of working, because data people, overwhelmingly, you can't split out the like product owners that need to understand the business value to the data. It's like this is the same person. So you're meeting in your own head to tell yourself what the business value is for the data thing that you're going to do. Most data, data work happens way more alone than software engineering happens. And you can even see this in things like code reviews, right? There's an
Right.
expectation that if you're a team and you own a specific piece of the software, everybody sort of owns the whole thing. Yeah, you have people who have specialties, but code reviews happen because now that you're putting in a piece of code into that system, the team owns that system, and it needs to work well effectively with everything else that's going on, and it needs to be well documented, etc. Most data work is one person doing a project by themselves, which is also why code reviews are so hard, because the people who are reviewing your code oftentimes have little context on the actual thing that you're doing, which is way different than code reviews in most software engineering projects. So that's why it's just a different job. There are some data people who function essentially as machine learning engineers.
Right.
I don't think that there's a problem having them even sit inside the same technology process. But still, unlike software, where when you build something, you have you build something, you think you're going to have a feature, that's the business value. You build the feature, the business value is delivered. Machine learning, you build something and then you need to see what the results are of that system, and maybe it delivers business value, maybe it doesn't, and maybe you need to go back and do analysis. It's not as straightforward of a process as software engineering, even in machine learning engineering.
I love going on. You're. This is also actually very controversial, to be honest. I fully agree with you, and the reason why it's so controversial is that there's a lot of, traditional roles like business analysis, project management, because whatever you want to call the role in like the agile space, is still the project manager for a particular business thing that needs to be delivered, that you execute on. And then what you're saying is that in the data space, you can't really know whether you did a good job. You need to validate, you need to adapt. There isn't this clear cut where you deliver it and then 100% it has not to be touched unless the business requirement change. It's super difficult, and the fine line is where I think wherein the data people have to think of themselves as being part of the business, right? And in this case, they don't even have to be the business. You just need, to tell them you're a business now, and they, somehow this puts the business head on, where automatically questions like, okay, no one else is going to verify my results, no one else is going to QC, I have to do it. And that means that I also have to have the ability to correct it, to change it, to keep being an owner of it. I know it's, people will have different contexts thinking about different things, but generally this makes data a very unthankful field for some projects, right? Because because if it works fine, no one knows about it. If it doesn't work fine, it's hard to justify that. Oh, that was just the first step of the process, right? The machine learning engineer, the data analyst, the data engineer, they have to go and actually do some changes, and it'll be fine, right?
Sure. Although we share that with DevOps and security and a whole bunch of other functions as well.
Right.
But to the point that you're making, that data people need to put a business hat on, I think that was the premise of data science from the beginning, is that it wasn't just statistics, it was statistics and business. And I think the idea that you can split that apart in the way that and I'm not even sure that I agree that in software engineering you can split it apart. I think the best software engineers that I've ever worked with understood the business that they were working on and understood the implications of code changes and what that meant for the business. But that aside, whatever level you think that software engineers need to understand the business, data people, I believe, need to understand it more than that, because
more than that.
there are more ways that your mental model of the business impact what you need to do on a day-to-day basis compared to I'm writing a billing system. And yes, sometimes you've got data engineering jobs where you just need to ship data from one place to another. You're doing log processing, you're organizing things. Those lean more towards strict software engineer versus needing to understand all the business context. This is not a yes or no, it's always a spectrum of data work.
I give you a European perspective on that, where the traditional industries that are still strong here, like manufacturing and traditional businesses, they kind of always did it like this, where if you were hired in IT at a bank, you were a banker that went through all the training and all everything, and then you just happened to do the IT part of the banking. But you didn't think of yourself as, oh, I'm just this IT person who can, job hopping every 6 months, switching industries and everything. That wasn't common before, the explosion of software development, demand and services demand. And same applies to manufacturing. So you can, if you're producing cars or certain components, you're very knowledgeable on the business side. You know the data that's produced, that's generated by the systems. You know what you're doing, and then you just kind of, creating software around that, and that makes it really, easy to skip the fact that a lot of people, especially changing places, don't have that domain knowledge, and that they can't really be super effective, even with their skills, if that domain knowledge is, not acquired quickly, or they're disinterested in acquiring it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, which brings me to, maybe talk a little bit, before I ask you about, I want to talk to you about data products. Maybe you could give a little bit of background about, about delivery layer, and because there's a connection to that.
Sure. So the thesis behind delivery layer is this: the tools in the world of data are overwhelmingly built to support internal decision making. And the entire modern data stack, the ingestion and the data warehousing and the modeling and the visualization, all of that works great as long as data stays inside your company. The minute the data needs to leave your company, the whole thing kind of falls apart because there are all of these assumptions around trust and usability and permissions and entitlements that no longer hold true when data needs to leave your company. So for most data teams, they don't necessarily come across this. This is like a niche of the data world. But when you do need to get data outside your company, when you need to have a website that Coke and Pepsi can each log into, and they can, they need to see their data and not the data that they're not supposed to. There's not great solutions. I used to work at Nielsen, for example, and at Nielsen we pretty much built custom platforms for everything because the functionality of what you could get out of the box with existing tools on the market just wasn't there. Even though, from my point of view, the way that data is created is all very unique. Healthcare data, automotive data, financial data. It's all very different, but the line charts and bar charts and data tables that people use to look at them are all pretty much the same. There's not
Right.
nobody's trying to innovate in their data business by saying, we've created this new type of chart. No one's ever seen it before. That's why you should buy our data. Or that's why you should go and check this out. They're just trying to deliver the data in a first-class way in a product that they can be proud of. And that's what Delivery Layer does. It is sort of like a mashup of a website builder and an API platform and a BI tool with a whole bunch of permissions. And it will connect to your data warehouse or your database. And then you can spin up, totally white labeled customer facing web applications and APIs that essentially act as your front end product for data.
Right.
And particularly businesses that need to sell data, or if you have a data asset that you're trying to commercialize, one of the most important things is that there are many use cases for many different customers when you do that. And what Delivery Layer lets you do is effectively and with speed actually implement those. So,
Right.
if what used to take 2 years to build custom software, you better have a really big business behind what's going to take you 2 years to build a front end for your customers to look at data. If it could take 6 weeks instead, it opens up a lot of commercialization opportunities. So that's Delivery Layer, and that's what the product does.
Very cool. Yeah, I saw a demo. It looks pretty cool. It's actually a very interesting take on something where you have to couple up a lot of tools that you could do this otherwise on your own, but then it doesn't really come in one package with all of the bells and whistles that you need to get that data out and deliver value quickly. It's actually in a very similar kind of spirit on our side. We created Monga.com. It's an API integration tool that actually serves a very interesting in a different way, a similar purpose. But our twist is all the data integration tools that you could possibly take to create this. They're either very expensive commercial tools, or in the open source world you have to do a lot of programming on your own. If you have the case where you need to integrate your APIs in a super high performance way with external APIs, you might have like a legacy system, and you might have like ecosystem partners, and you want to make sure that you don't spin an entire software development team just to keep up with this API changes, but rather do this as a service and with in a very efficient way. And I guess in your case, you're also kind of going after the enterprise customer. The case is you want to do this for companies at scale that have that case. You're not going after the mini startup, but rather the bigger enterprise, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a small Delivery Layer is a small startup, so we don't turn away people. But generally, the people who have data that they want to commercialize are bigger companies.
which is actually it's turning people away. It's also another controversial topic. But yeah, some customers you don't want to have. That's also fine. You just yeah, of course, you don't have to take everyone, especially in the fact that you kind of you what prompted you to go from like having a you used to own like a very large P&L at Nielsen, right?
Yeah.
And then you said, okay, well, that's a great job, but I'd like to risk it and create a company and create a product. What was your thinking behind it? Like,
Well, I took a job in the middle also that ended up like they restructured, and I left. And so when, but I'll give you, it's an interesting question, right? Because before I got into, I fell into data. Well, my data career has been nonlinear. Let me say it like that. So I started as an analyst. I studied statistics in school, and then I started as an analyst after I graduated. But I would not have considered myself a data person at that time because I was a securities analyst. I worked in finance at a
right,
financial company in New York. And so I was I spent all of my days in Excel doing analysis, analyzing companies for potential investment or doing operational stuff for some of the portfolio companies that we owned. But I would not have considered myself a data person, even though data was
right,
central to what I did. And then I decided that all of the cool things that were going to get built in my lifetime, like it wasn't the next hedge fund that was going to change the world. It was going to
right,
be the next technology product. So I quit my finance job. I taught myself web programming, and I launched a startup that totally crashed and burned. And then I decided to go get a job at a startup because I sort of figured that I kind of understood the business side. And if I could learn from a great technology organization and understand the technology side, whatever I wanted to do when I grew up, I could sort of decide, right? Because
right,
I would have both of these skills, the business and the technical, and I thought that those were the two big things that I needed. Um, and so that was when data science started to become a thing, 12, 13 years ago. And so I took a job at this startup, which had a great technology organization. And I was the only programmer who knew what revenue meant, who could interface with the business. And so it was just sort of natural that I came to be a data person.
right.
Um, and and so and so for me, um, I've always felt, and then for 10, even though I was a pretty entrepreneurial person, for 10 plus years, I was a very happily employed data leader. And, 13 years, 14, however long it was. But I think data is a great job. And most good data jobs are at companies. They're not
Right.
at startups.
Yeah.
I still consider myself a data person because I I I've been a data person for a long time, and I work in a data startup. But like startup CEO, my actual day to day nowadays is mostly sales and marketing and product versus like actual data analysis work.
That sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. But interesting thing you say is that I mean, I saw you did operations research statistics at Columbia.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about this data stuff is that, unlike, I mean, I do, I can tell you from flying pilots, I do have a private pilot license, not a commercial one, but every commercial pilot I know, everyone will tell you I always knew I wanted to be a pilot. But no data person will ever tell you I always knew I was going to, wrangle with data and a little bit of software engineering and actually like it. But then when they get into that, it seems like even after we do, get management jobs and CEOs and run companies, we still think of ourselves as data people because we're just so interested in the tech and find this niche intriguing. And that's why I think the data community in and of itself is so interesting, and everyone is different, but they're alike in that particular regard of nerdiness for data.
Sure. 100%.
Very different to like the pure mathematician people, very different to the software engineers. So it's like it's gotten to be its own thing. And I think it's, regardless of how the technology and the stack and all that develops, I think it's going to stay. It's going to stay
100%.
like
And
that.
I don't know, this paper came out a very long time ago, called Analyzing the Analyzers, which was like right at the beginning of this new wave of data science. It was like, all right, well, who are these data scientists? What do they do? What kind of jobs do they like? And they came up with these archetypes of sort of the different types of data scientists. And one of them was data business person, which
Right.
was this mix. Like there was like the data visualization person and the like R&D modeling person, and then the data business person. And for me, I always felt closely aligned with that, which was, to me, I think, from a business perspective and even from a global perspective, although we don't need to get into the sort of like bigger picture philosophy type stuff. But I always feel like data has so much opportunity to help drive businesses forward. And I don't think we've even gotten close to achieving like the peak of what that can be. And so for me, when I thought about, frankly, all of the different opportunities that I've looked at over my career, it was always about like, where do I think I can see data making the most business difference, and how
Right.
do I go join organizations or take roles or pursue projects where, because we now have visibility into something we didn't have visibility of, or because data can scale something or give us insights, that now we can do something different in the world. And because of that, we can all be a lot more successful. And so
Right.
to me, that's always been the promise of data. And like everything, I think there have been success stories and failure stories in the pursuit of that.
I mean, yeah, and also if you look for the history of it, I remember like it kind of like it started with analytics. First was analytics, then it was data science. At first everyone was a big four many years ago. It's like, oh, analytics. Oh, what was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're doing analytics. This is everything we do. It's so great. Great in spirit. In reality, didn't happen. Not everything happened the way it was supposed to. Then the data science came. Oh, sexiest job of the 21st century. Be a data scientist. Great stuff. But then also the ROIs didn't pan out. There's a lot of hype, and then it kind of died out. And then data engineering came along. Oh, new platforms, Hadoop. Was kind of moving along until it sunsetted. And then we had the whole thing that we're still going into with Gen AI, right? But what the underlying thing that stays in the back is, it's about decision making, right? It's about decision making by automated scripts, by machines, and a decision making by humans. And so just selling insights, kind of sells it short, right? It's not like you're going to find this great insight that otherwise will not be there, but it's kind of like a practice and not a thing. But I think it's developing to a point where you're absolutely right that we haven't even begun to get to the benefits of that. I think we're still in kind of the early phases, and we shouldn't think of it as like, oh, it's any different, right? So yeah, very exciting field to be in. And from my perspective, one of the things that we also do is focus on legacy code migrations, right? Where you have a ton of legacy data scripts, which is like legacy reporting, legacy CSV generation. This runs the world. This runs actual systems by large corporations, and there's a ton of it. And so what we're experimenting with now is, can we use, how can we use AI in every part of the process of this migration to improve the outcome, to be more efficient. And it's a very bumpy journey. We're finding a lot of things that surprise us in terms of performance and options, and a lot of things where we're just at the beginning. I saw a joke today saying, "Oh, GPT-4 is 1 year old, and I still have my job, right?" So
yeah,
where do you think this is going to go? How do you think what is he like in the, let's say not the future vision, but like in the next 6 to 12 months? The impact of these newer models on the way we do, this normal basic stuff like business intelligence, like reporting and analytics.
Sure. So I think in general, and this from just for some context, also for the audience, at Nielsen, I owned the P&L of a pretty large business that our core data set came from an AI model. And when I it was Nielsen Sports business focused on sports sponsorship. We analyze every second of sports to see what brands are on the screen, and then we help give the value of that for the teams and the leagues and the rights holders. So it's this massive data set generated via machine learning computer vision models. It used to be generated totally manually, and then I was in charge of shifting, essentially, like replacing the guts of that system and putting in machine learning computer vision models to drive more scalability and speed going forward. So I've got a lot of context on what it means from a business perspective to run a significant amount of revenue through machine learning types of products with the challenges that they face. And I think overall, Gen AI is going to follow a similar-ish type of arc as the internet did, which is in the early days, there are some really interesting use cases that come up immediately with a lot of hype in the earliest days, and everything is going to be expensive and complicated, and people aren't going to have any real understanding of how these things actually work. And so there's going to be a lot of pain and suffering from those early things at the beginning. And then people are going to be like, a little bit down, you know, from a business, I mean, the internet never slowed down, but the sort of hype around it, there was a period of reflection after many of the very early blow-ups to say, well, yes, it's going to be a big deal. And then, but is it going to be as big of a deal as quickly as we thought? Probably not. And then over time, look at what we're doing right now over the internet, where we are, very far apart from each other. You're in Europe, I'm in New York. We're having a video conversation here. It's going to be posted on YouTube and other things, and people are going to listen to it and watch it. I mean, the net end impact was probably larger than the initial vision of what the impact was going to be in terms of how the internet changed things. I think Gen AI and data is probably going to be similar. I don't know if it's going to have the same extent of impact as the internet has had in our lives. And maybe there are other new things that need to happen, like mobile, or like improved speed, whatever, in order to make those things happen. But I think I think it's got clear use cases, because it can obviously do a pretty decent-ish job at reasoning through things that people would otherwise be needed to reason through in a very broad way. And there are ways that you can specify and fine-tune that reasoning for specific use cases. The problems with Gen AI or any AI models are how you deal with the inevitable being wrong, right? Like, the only thing that matters from a business context for AI products or machine learning products is, what are the implications when you're wrong? And that's why we've seen that, like self-driving cars, for example, I think haven't, like, I remember 8 or 9 years ago, the expectation was that self-driving cars were so imminent. All of the car manufacturers were thinking about, like, replacing their windshields with like in-car entertainment, so that you could just relax as the car drove you and watch a movie. And that, like, in the car shows, that was what they were reimagining the future of the car as a leisure vehicle, where you were, entertained while the computer drove you. That didn't happen. And it didn't happen because the consequences of being wrong are very, very bad,
right, exactly,
when you're driving a car. So
no, but let me actually, you're making some very interesting points here. Let me unpack something that I found very intriguing. I'm a full techno optimist. I think the parallel with the internet in terms of productivity leap absolutely applies. What I think is true is that a lot of the backlash that we see now with, kind of increased attention by regulators on regulating AI it actually is not so much because of AI, but kind of an after effect on not regulating the internet, on all of the things that happened because, as we had this massive leap in communication being commoditized, now intelligence is being commoditized. And so a lot of the things is not really that the AI will do something bad, but software will do something bad. Like we're really regulating if then else statements. And so some of it is understandable. But I fully agree with you that, and there's a lot of risk, certainly, just like with the internet. But that, if you think about the time where we had, the earliest super great use cases with like, e-commerce, you could buy stuff online, so great, and all the retail businesses were like, oh, this is gonna kill jobs, and now, if you think about now, that discussion is, I've never heard this discussion for like 10 years already, right? Do you really want to go back to the shopping experience of 1999 or 2001? Probably not, right? You're okay like this, and business is settled, and you still have shops and all that. And so, yeah. But I don't agree that the impact on data, I think for us in data, the one interesting idea was like, do data and AI go really hand in hand? This was raised like oftentimes out here, but AI is different. How is it different, right? It's different and it's the same in many ways. What's your view on that? If in the context of, let's say, a data product company or a consulting company, combining or not combining data and AI products and consultancies?
I mean,
to give you a little context, maybe
it's an interesting question.
To give you a little context, the people that are knowledgeable on applying AI, probably not your technicians, and are much closer to the business consulting people. Whereas the data engineers and the data scientists, well, have they made the leap to really know how to best utilize the newest in Gen AI? And so you'd have to take a conscious decision. Do you really combine this as a product service offering, or do you keep it separate, for example?
Well, all right. Let me just say that the market has spoken a little bit here in that they think that data people and data consultancies are the best positioned to build and drive AI efforts. That said, I don't think it's as clear cut, because I was having a conversation 6 months ago around talent with Gen AI, and the question came up like, who's really going to drive more impact from AI in your business? Is it going to be some data person that's done classic data work for 20 years, or is it some young person? Is it like the equivalent of like your friend's nephew who builds websites in the early days of the internet, right? Like, is it a COBOL programmer who's going to build a better website, or is it the kid down the street who messes around with websites in their spare time? And I don't, again, I think the market has mostly said that they've said yes to data. The data consultancies see the money and they're saying yes. And Delivery Layer doesn't really do much Gen AI work. And Delivery Layer is a product. It's not strictly a consulting company, although most of the product sales have a little bit of professional services tied into them. But I don't think it's so clear that data people are the ones. And I also have seen a lot of people who have always said we need to care about data governance and like focus on data governance and invest heavily on data governance. And then the minute that Gen AI comes out, it's like, now we really extra need to invest in data governance. And then once we're done with making the data governed, then we can do Gen AI. I generally don't. I see that as sort of like the tail wagging the dog. Like, the way that data becomes governed is because you have an important business use case. And then that's because you could invest an unlimited amount in data governance and organizing your data. but most data doesn't need to be governed and organized. Only the data that you need to pursue a specific business value does. And so if you invest everywhere with everything, like
it's actually a very good insight.
Yeah.
To be honest, that's a very interesting insight, especially with the younger person who is, because they would bring the curiosity to learn about the new technologies and kind of synthesize ways how to apply them to the old problems. Whereas the person dealing for 20 years with the old problems, they just would not make that mental jump. And which is I think an ongoing theme in data, where this kind of the value also the community, the podcast, where you really need to stay up to date. It doesn't make sense to be like 20 years doing PL SQL or something like this. If you've done only PL SQL for 20 years, good for you. But I would, it's not, like you said, you're probably not the best person positioned to do AI. That doesn't mean that you can't do it. If you set your mind, then you're better positioned, I think, than someone who's been doing websites. And it all boils down to have you kept up with the latest stuff and thinking about ways how to apply it, because we're in the applications world. This comes back to the whole A/B testing and not in the world of theories and academic stuff is great, but business really rarely works the way that we are taught at business school and at and let alone at computer science school, right?
Yeah, totally. And there's a big difference between someone with 20 years of experience and someone with 1 year of experience 20 times.
Right.
And you can, data, there are some jobs that you do essentially the same thing. You don't necessarily grow that much. But if you want to...
Accounting. Sorry to my accounting friends. They were happy for that. Friends. They know we don't. I don't mean
it. But that's not actually true, because when you're more senior in accounting, of course. Your job is relationship management.
It's a joke.
But from my perspective, this is like I find that data people have many skills that they like. There's so many, like, you can never be good at everything that you're doing
100%.
or great at everything that you're doing as a data person, because data is so multifaceted. You're like, you've got the technical and the business and the math, and even any one of those three, like even within business, like, the best marketers in the world spend 20 years on marketing. But if you're like a data person supporting a company, you've got like a little bit of marketing and finance and sales and customer success and product. And you're just like, you're going to like, there's always so much. You're never gonna finish all the learning in data, which is one of the things that I love about it. It's just, you're always limited somewhere by your skill sets, and there's always opportunities to grow.
100%. Yeah. Well, yeah, very, very interesting insight, because someone has to think about what happens from the upstream system till the reporting and the usage. Someone has to think about, like, this whole thing is not going to be solved by software engineering alone, and also not by business alone. So this gap, I think, is there to stay, and it especially, I think it's a great advice from your side for more junior people coming into data, to make these eclectic experiences with like business domain stuff, with more software. Like you mentioned, you're coming from statistics, but then you had to learn more the technology side. So there's like all these different experience that you need to, yeah.
And by the way, and this might be my most controversial statement, but senior people too. Like I started from scratch in many ways when I started Delivery Layer. Like I knew about posting on social media and talking to people and trying to sell, but I had never done those jobs. And every job that I've taken has had meaningful pieces that I needed to learn. I think this idea that once you're a couple years in, you know what you need and you're done with the learning is just very bad for people and the world. I think that no matter how many years of experience you have, you should know better than anyone that doesn't mean you know everything, and there are major gaps in your skill set, and so there's always more to do and always more to learn.
It's a very controversial statement. I tell you why, because we're just discussing back and forth with friends and colleagues about selling, and highly technical people have trouble getting good at sales. And there's a lot of hypotheses why that might be. Maybe a controversial statement to even hypothesize about it. But one of the things that I found is that we tend to want to know the details of how things work. And we can only sell something that we're super convinced is a great product, great technical solution. Not knowing those details enables you to sell stuff because you could be more easily convinced that it's such a great product for your customers. And so I will not make any parallels with any of the incumbent companies selling software, but you can imagine there's quite a few of them. So my take on this is it shouldn't be knowing technical details of stuff should not be a disadvantage to sell your product or idea. It should be an advantage.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not a skill that comes natural to most of us, and something you need to continually learn how to improve, right?
100%.
100%. Before we conclude, how can people find you, or say a few words about people who want to find out more about you or get in touch with you?
Sure. So the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my social media posting, etc. So if you just search for Solomon Kahn, all O's in Solomon, on LinkedIn, I'm sure you'll have my name in the show notes somewhere. So just copy and paste into LinkedIn, and then you can find me, follow along. And then for delivery layer, if you are a business that needs to get your data to customers in a product that you can be proud of, and you want to do that without hiring a development team, and you want to do it quickly to the point that you could even impact your P&L numbers this year, then give me a call or send me a note on LinkedIn, and that's where you can find me.
Great, Solomon. Thank you so much for finding the time to talk to me. I hope I'll catch up with you in person next time I'm in New York. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
bye, everyone.
Really great. This is a super fun episode.
Yes. Cheers, everyone.